Hey guys, tonight we wander cobbled marble streets under a slanted Athenian moon, inhaling the mingled scents of olive oil lamps, goat cheese, and philosophical rebellion. You probably won't survive this. Socrates' life literally ends with a glass of poison. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments so I know who's joining from wherever you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the crowded agora, the ancient marketplace alive with vendors hawking figs, clay pots clinking like tap-dancing sandals, and curious onlookers gathering around the man who will change Western thought forever. There he stands, Socrates, swirling the hem of his cloak, hair a ragged halo, beard unkempt, no grooming spa for our guy. His voice drifts across the stalls. Define virtue, he challenges. The crowd leans in like they're tuning a broken radio. You can almost taste the tension, like biting into an unripe olive. Back in 399 BCE, a jury of 500 fellow Athenians convicts him on charges of corrupting the youth and impiety, sentencing him to die by hemlock of fact, as polished and undeniable as a marble column. You sidle up to his prison cell, the stones damp and cold underfoot, and catch him mid-sip of the bitter brew. He calmly thanks the jailer, as if slipping into a comfy robe rather than embracing death. A fringe rumor whispers through the bars. Socrates supposedly bathed just once a year, and only then if someone paid him enough to cover the sopa quirky cleanliness habit that would horrify your modern spa therapist as the poison courses. Through his limbs, you feel a delicate heaviness settle in the cell. His last words reportedly call to his friend Crito to sacrifice a rooster to Asclepius, the god of healing. Some interpret it as a literal request. Others say it's an ironic pun on curing the soul. Historians still argue whether Socrates truly believed in the immortality of the soul or used it as a rhetorical device to unsettle his listeners. Imagine that debate flickering like torchlight among dusty scholars. You imagine the chill of that goblet slipping past his lips, cool and merciless, and you shudder. Yet there's a spark of wonder as you witness his final stand, a man unbowed by state power, choosing truth over safety. He never wrote a single word himself, trusting his disciples, like Plato to etch his ideas into eternity. It's a mainstream fact that Plato's dialogues preserve our image of Socrates. It's like an ancient filter making him eternally photogenic in philosophical selfies. Even as you linger by those damp stones, you catch a hint of something offbeat. Some fringe accounts suggest that after drinking the hemlock, Socrates wandered calmly around the room for half an hour, chatting about poultry rituals before the poison fully took hold. Whether or not that actually happened, it adds a dash of human whimsy to a story that could otherwise read like a dry legal transcript. You shiver as the hemlock's chill spreads inward. But Socrates remains serene, cracking a gentle joke about how his critics should have studied more oracles in their youth. You almost chuckle, despite the tragedy. 3 light laughs echo around that cell. One at his eternal disregard for social grooming. Another at how he might have scorned modern social media. I imagine Socrates with a Twitter feed, and a third at the idea that his final words involve chicken sacrifice instead of a dramatic farewell speech. It's absurd and strangely comforting. It's like finding a feather in a storm. Beyond that cold stone, the agora goes silent as the news spreads. The gadfly of Athens is gone, yet the questions he planted take root and bloom through centuries, from dusty libraries to late-night dorm debates. You slip out of the cell and step back into moonlit streets, aware that you carry more than the memory of his death. You carry his fearless quest for truth. And as you walk, you feel the breeze whisper Socrates' legacy, that challenging authority. even at the risk of your life, can spark revolutions of thought. Now, you rest against a column, feeling both unsettled and oddly inspired. You'll carry Socrates' final lesson into your dreams. Question everything. Embrace paradox, and maybe skip that annual bath. And as you drift off, remember that next time we'll wander the damp walls of a Roman prison to witness Boethius crafting solace out of despair. So hold on to that rooster sacrifice tale as you step away from Socrates' cell, echoing with the hush of departure. You cross a landscape of shifting time that drops you into early 6th century Italy, where a modest villa in Ravenna glistens under a pale dawn. The air carries the humid sweetness of olive trees and the temps of fresh ink on vellum. And beneath your feet, the mosaic floors once polished smooth creak with each step. Through iron bars, you spot Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius, hunched over a wooden desk, penning what will become the consolation of philosophy during his house arrest in 523 AD. Weaving Christian teachings with Platonic ideals as charges of treason swirl like dust motes around him. His quill scratches rhythms against parchment, like a ghostly typewriter in a soundproof room. And you likely won't survive this. Political intrigue in the Ostrogothic court can be deadly. Meanwhile, Lady Philosophy waits off stage, more reliable than the villa's drafty windows, guiding his thoughts like a mild-mannered life coach, albeit one in a toga. You can almost feel the candle's warmth brushing your fingertips. It's promising clarity in the dim corridors of despair. You step closer, noting the faint rattle of guard keys echoing down the hallway, punctuating the almost meditative hum of Boethius's labor. Stale breadcrumbs litter the floor beneath his chair, a humble feast compared to the sumptuous banquets he hosted as consul in 510. A dia mainstream fact, as plain as a marble pillar. Yet this villa-turned-prison room houses a grandeur of ideas, unmatched by those feasts. Rumor has it, Boethius kept a pet dormouse hidden in a clay jar to keep him company, scuttling through the folds of his toga while he debated the nature of the good life. A quirky detail medieval gossip-mongers loved. Historians still argue whether that dormouse was real or merely a symbol in his allegory, scurrying in and out of consciousness as fortune's wheel spun. You nearly trip over a stray parchment roll, imagining how annoyed he would be by a modern student griping about overdue library books. 3 light laughs escape your lips, one at the notion of a philosophical rodent, another picturing Boethius ordering it to fetch ink, and a third at future scholars fussing over his footnotes. The vigil of writing continues as you settle onto a stone bench, the surface cool against your calves. Boethius's words shape into 5 books of dialogue where Lady Philosophy consoles him for his loss of wealth and status, speaking with the calm authority of a serene psychologist. The candle sputters as if amazed by his resilience, dripping wax in slow-motion tears onto the desk. You run a finger along the Latin script, each line a lifeline thrown across abyssal doubt. It's widely accepted that this work became the medieval era's most popular text after the Bible, copied in hundreds of manuscripts, a fact as ubiquitous as church bells at dawn. You sense the sacred hush of a scriptorium, yet catch a fringe tale that some scribes spiced their copies with marginal doodles of dancing bishops, turning grim theology into medieval comic relief. Scholars still argue whether these doodles were spontaneous creativity or coded messages mocking ecclesiastical authority. You stifle a grin at imagining bishops moonwalking across the margins, a clandestine gif long before digital realms existed. Outside, the olive branches rustle in a breeze, carrying distant strains of Gregorian chant, reminding you that faith pervades every corner of this era, from stone church apses to cracked villa walls. Boethius pauses, running a palm across his brow, ink smudging across a fevered question. What is the highest good? He blends Cicero's Stoic calm with Christian hope, asserting that true happiness resides in the eternal, not in fleeting on our mainstream conclusion that underpinned centuries of scholastic thought. Yet a shadow of dissent flickers, as some Hermetic traditions claim he hid esoteric teachings, embedding pagan symbolism in allegory. Historians still argue whether Boethius genuinely sought harmony between faith and reason, or subtly critiqued the new church's hierarchy by celebrating classical philosophy. Your heart flutters, drawn into that tension like a moth to a candle flame. A guard's heavy footsteps shuffle past a slit in the door, reminding you this sanctuary of ideas is also a cell. Beyond the bars, an iron-bound tribunal convenes too. Hear vague charges of conspiracy. You picture Boethius stepping forward in his senator's toga, exchanging polite nods with the judges until silence falls and the verdict arrives. Exile and confiscation of property. Later escalating to execution in 524 AD, that execution date stands as starkly as any public notice. Yet fringe whispers suggest his eyes glowed for minutes after death, marking him for sainthood in secret cults until official channels shut them down. Scholars still argue whether Theodoric's respect for Boethius delayed his sentence or if pure political paranoia sealed his fate. If you crack a wry joke about medieval office politics, imagine your boss saying you're fired permanently. And a second about how Boethius's last to-do list must have looked comically short. Write masterpiece, poison, lecture ghosts. A third zinger wonders what he'd tweet if he'd had Twitter. #locked up but lucid. As dusk deepens, you return to the villa's interior, candlelight flickering across frescoes of classical heroes long gone. You feel the hush of history pressing close. Every breath, tastes of elder scrolls and mortal urgency. Boethius dips his quill one last time, scribing lines on fortune's fickleness. When everything is lost, the soul finds its true strength. That line crystallizes into a lantern for centuries of thinkers stumbling through darkness. The air hums with an almost audible exhale as he lays down his pen and gazes toward the barred window, eyes reflecting both hope and resignation. You sense that his fate is sealed, yet his words will outlive walls, courts, and crowns. You rise to leave as owls stir in olive groves, their calls echoing under an indigo sky. Carrying his final reflections, you step into the night, feeling both the fragility of power and the resilience of reason. Medieval scribes will copy these consolations by candlelight. Pilgrim scholars will cling to them in cellars, and future minds will find solace in Boethius's calm defiance. And as you drift away, you pocket one more light laugh at the memory of dancing bishops in the margins, proof that even in the darkest confinement, human whimsy can flicker. You emerge from the flickering candlelit villa into a night crisp with the scent of pine and church incense. And before you looms the foreboding silhouette of the Roman Inquisition's arena. Here in 1600, Giordano Bruno stands tethered to a wooden stake in the Campo dei Fiori, his spindly frame bathed in the hungry glow of torchlight. You probably won't survive this. Heresy trials in the Renaissance were less about truth and more about crushing cosmic questions. As reeds of heat ripple around you, you see Bruno's penetrating eyes fixed on the heavens, as though pleading the stars themselves to bear witness to his vision of an infinite universe. The crackle of kindling underfoot merges with the roar of the crowd, the air thick enough to slice with a codex page. You sidle closer. Catching snatches of Bruno's last pronouncements, he refuses to recant his belief in multiple worlds and celestial pluralism, daring the church's dogma like a tightrope walker above a blazing pit. It's a well-confirmed fact that the charge sheet against him listed 8 counts of heresy. including denial of Christ's divinity and endorsement of an infinite universe, making his execution an unmistakable public warning. The stone slab beneath your boot bears scorch marks from earlier burnings, each one a silent epitaph. This man's idea shattered more orthodoxy than a meteor through stained glass. Yet centuries later, his defiance still pulses through the veins of freethinkers worldwide. In the smoky haze, you overhear a fringe whisper. Some occultists claim Bruno's ashes spontaneously reassembled into a sphere on the scaffold and vanished in a swirl of purple smoke, symbolizing his immortal spirit. Whether this actually happened or was after-the-fact propaganda to kindle secret societies, historians still argue whether such stories emerged from genuine eyewitnesses or were pure theatrical embellishment designed to rally underground esoterica buffs. You crane your neck, half expecting crackling neon smoke, but only embers drift upward. It's carried off by a breeze scented with burnt oak. The stakes smolder around Bruno's ankles, and you feel a twitch of astonishment at the serenity of his posture. He raises his head to the sky, voice calm but resonant. In my mind, I am feeling the infinity of the worlds. Those words cut through the roaring flames like a silver thread. 3 light laughs catch in your throat, one at imagining Bruno smugly checking celestial orbits on a Renaissance iPhone. Another picturing him scolding the Inquisition for poor ventilation, and a third at the cosmic irony that centuries later, people would search for extraterrestrial life courtesy of a webcam. Bruno would have loved a live stream. The crowd's faces flicker in shifting shadows, weary peasants, curious clerics, curious nobles, very one fixated on the fiery tableau. You watch beads of sweat rolling down Bruno's temples as wax from burning torches drips onto his broad-brimmed hat. The black brim warps, curling under the heat, reminding you of Socrates' indifference to grooming. Both men share a flair for style statements that defy practical fashion. A guard tosses a final kindling log onto the pyre, and the flames engulf Bruno's legs. You shiver at the memory of Boethius's villa firelight, where ideas burned softly across parchment. Contrasting violently with this embodiment of human fury, it's indisputable that Bruno's execution represented the Church's determination to suppress Copernican and Neoplatonic ideas, predating Galileo's trial by decades. Yet some scholars suggest that political maneuvering by powerful cardinals and jealous rivals played as large a role as doctrinal purity. Historians still argue whether Bruno was targeted primarily for his cosmological heresy or because he publicly mocked the Inquisition's infallibility, staging satirical plays in private parlors to lampoon inquisitors. You lean forward, imagining those clandestine performances, hush-hush comedy nights 20 feet from the pyre, laughter and fear mingling like fragrant herbal smoke as the inferno rips higher. You taste ash on the breeze, like the end of a summer bonfire, minus the marshmallows. Bruno's silhouette blurs in the flames, and you sense the enormity of his sacrifice. To die for ideas so expansive, they threaten the very architecture of power. Beyond the scaffold, you glimpse a cloaked figure scribbling madly in a leather-bound journal, perhaps constructing an early pamphlet urging people to question geocentrism. The notion that underground pamphleteers passed around Bruno's ideas on handmade leaflets is a fringe detail scholars debate, wondering whether such networks actually existed or if they're retrospective romantic myths. Historians still argue whether Bruno's writings truly circulated widely before his execution or were rediscovered later by radical students. You lick charcoal from your lips, stifling a grin at how history would devour his work with ravenous appetite. Books on the infinite universe cropping up in clandestine circles across Europe. 3 more light laughs flicker, one picturing Bruno's spirit rolling its eyes at modern flat earth believers. Another imagining him running a secret philosophy podcast in the Renaissance. And a third at the idea of him starting the first cosmic conspiracy theory forum on coded parchment. The absurdity blends with awe as you absorb how one man's cosmic imagination kindled centuries of scientific curiosity. As the flames die down to glowing embers, you step closer to Bruno's remnants, now collapsed into inert blackened wood. Despite the grotesquerie, you sense a thrill. The flesh may burn, but ideas, once unleashed, evade any pyre. You breathe in the smoky dawn, crisp with the promise of new horizons, just as Bruno once did before his arrest. The sky above is a canvas of pinprick stars, infinite and indifferent to human cruelty. You raise a hand as if to touch one. You slip off the cobblestones of Renaissance Rome into a crisp Amsterdam morning, where mist hovers like a ghost over narrow canals and the scent of fermenting tulip bulbs mingles with fresh-pressed flax oil. Head, behind a modest wooden door, lies Benedictus de Spinoza's small lens-grinding workshop, where he hunches over glass spheres, polishing with cloth so fine you half expect it to dissolve in your hands. You probably won't survive this. Theological excommunications entighten it. Jewish communities could be as ruthless as any Inquisition fire. So, as canal barges creak by and gulls scold overhead, you feel the weight of suspicion settle on your shoulders like damp wool. Inside, Spinoza's fingers move with mechanical precision, buffing a lens that will focus the eye toward clarity. And, in his daring pantheistic view, toward God as nature itself. The wood smoke from his bench's small brazier curls through the room, tickling your nostrils with a warm, smoky sweetness. Through the open window, you catch fragments of Dutch conversation, horse-drawn carts, rattling pottery jars, and a distant church bell tolling twice for midday. Sunlight shards strike the polished lenses, scattering rainbows across the flagstones like fragments of his scattered reputation. News arrives in the form of a terse black ink edict nailed to the door of the local synagogue. Spinoza is under chairful excommunication, shunned by every member of the Jewish community. It's a well-documented fact that on July 27, 1656, he received this ban. Accused of heresy for denying divine providence, prophecy, and the literal truth of Scripture. You trace your finger over the Hebrew letters, feeling the sharp sting of exclusion radiate through the paper. Beyond this threshold, no Jew may speak to him, trade with him, or even pass within 4 cubits of his person. You step back into the street, your shoes clicking on damp brick. Recalling Socrates' indifference to annual baths, Spinoza's own hygiene was equally Spartan. Yet rumor claims he once refused to wash for a month because he considered soap a distraction from philosophical meditation. A fringe whisper says he tried to train a pet tortoise to deliver manuscripts to friends, tying tiny scrolls to its shell. Historians still argue whether that tortoise expedition ever really occurred, or if it's just another allegory about steady progress. You can't help but grin at the image of a determined shelled philosopher on a tiny quest as you follow Spinoza's footprints in the mud. You enter a dimly lit study upstairs, shelves lined with leather-bound books, Descartes' principles of philosophy, Euclid's Elements, and half-finished pages of Spinoza's own ethics. Oh, the hush here is nearly sacred, broken only by the occasional scratch of quill against paper and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. You feel the solemn thrill of trespassing in a mind in revolt, senses sharpened like a newly ground lens, catching every detail. Spinoza sits before a low table, dipping quill into an ink pot the color of bruised plums, framing arguments about substance, attributes, and modes. He posits that everything that exists is in God, and nothing can be apart from God pantheism that would reshape modern theology. It's widely accepted that his Ethics, published posthumously in 1677, is a masterpiece of rationalist thought, influencing Enlightenment figures from Goethe to Einstein. Yet in this very moment, you witness his conviction coalesced into geometric propositions, each theorem extending towards spiritual freedom. The midday sun shifts, flushing the room with gold. And Spinoza's lips curve in a brief, half-amused smile. He murmurs about a medieval alchemist who claimed to distill the soul into a drop of mercury. And you imagine how absurd that would seem to this man, who finds his philosopher's stone in reason itself. 3 light laughs bubble up, one at picturing Spinoza ordering distilled souls on an apothecary receipt, another imagining him grumbling about modern data privacy. You want to track my thoughts? Here's my ethics. And a third, at the notion of him conducting a TED Talk on God or nature. Why not both? A draft drifts in, carrying the faint aroma of licorice from a nearby sweet shop, a modern treat that he would have scoffed at as frivolous. Though fringe tales insist he kept a secret jar of licorice in his backpack to console moments of doubt, historians still argue whether he actually consumed licorice, or if the story emerged as a biting metaphor for his black and white worldview. You savor an imaginary licorice root, feeling its bittersweet tang spark against the canvas of his austere idealism. Outside, group of rabbis clustered by a canal-side cafe, their faces somber as they sip strong coffee from delicate porcelain cups. They whisper about the heretical danger of Spinoza's views, convinced he's dismantling the very foundations of Mosaic law. Scholars today still debate whether his excommunication was triggered more by his radical biblical criticism, or by envy over his friendships with prominent Christian intellectuals. You imagine the rabbis glancing across the canal, twitching at every ripple for fear of seeing Spinoza's silhouette reflected in the water. You drift back to the workshop, where Spinoza now grinds a tiny glass disc the size of a coin, murmuring, "That clear vision is a moral imperative. Moral clarity requires the same polish as a lens." He turns the disc, examining it against daylight, then walks over to a rooftop terrace overlooking rows of gabled houses. You follow, feeling the breeze lift strands of your hair as he points to the sky. He gestures broadly, voice soft but resolute. Everything is everywhere. Nothing is apart. His theology of immanence unfolds like the canal map beneath your feet, a web where every drop of water is part of the whole. 3 more light laughs resonate in the terraces. Quiet, one imagining Spinoza sweating during yoga, namaste nature. Another picturing him making a Spotify playlist called Divine Vibes Only, and a third at him doodling geometric proofs in the margins of a menu. The humor eases the gravitas, reminding you that even a man exiled by his own community can find warmth in human whimsy. The sun sinks low, casting long reflections across the canal, and Spinoza slips back inside, closing the shutters against evening chill. You stand in the empty terrace, lens glinting on the low table like a miniature moon. This solitary glass orb embodies his rebellion, a tool that sees beyond dogma into the seamless fabric of reality. You sense his calm acceptance of exile, a courage born of reason rather than outrage. As you step out onto the canal's edge, you glance back at his workshop's single glowing window, recalling Boethius's candlelit consolations and Bruno's blazing pyre. This light is different, steady, rational, unconsumed by flame, impervious to bans. You pocket the image of that lens, feeling its smooth curve echo in your palm. A reminder that truth sometimes needs polishing but never shuns the world that hones it. You glide down the canal in a small, robot Spinoza's imagined vessel skimming across reflections of red-tiled roofs and church spires. The water's surface quivers like the membrane between philosophy and faith, rippling with questions that refuse to settle. You exhale, each breath misting in the cool air, carrying the scent of potential revolutions in thought. Tomorrow, your journey continues to 18th century Paris, where Voltaire's pamphlets slip past royal censors in a dance of ink and intrigue. But for now, you rest against the boat's wooden side, lulled by gentle waves, knowing that once you've seen through Spinoza's lens, the world looks a little more divine. You tuck the oar cushion under your arm and slip through a narrow alley off the Seine. Stepping into mid-18th century Paris, where the damp chill of dawn hugs you like an overeager ant, the narrow streets' cobblestones glisten from last night's rain, reflecting gaslight like glimmers from iron-latticed windows. You probably won't survive this. Mocking both crown and church in monarchical France often lands you in the Bastille. As you press your back into the brick, you inhale the mingled scents of spilled ink, freshly baked baguettes, and fermenting wine barrels, a heady perfume. That means words are being smuggled onto presses as you stand there. 3 soft laughs escape you. One picturing Voltaire juggling quills like a circus performer. Another at imagining him live-tweeting royal edicts. Hey. And a third at secret agents swapping pamphlets like Pakeman, CARDS, a discreet knock at a hatch. Set low in the wall summons a muffled voice in the shadows. Le code, mon ami. You whisper the password, K, and the hatch slides open to reveal a dimly lit back room where a secret printing press roars like a sleeping dragon. Candles flicker against wooden racks of lead type, each letter waiting patiently to become satire. You stroke the cool iron press plate, feeling the latent power of ideas that can outlive kings. It's a mainstream fact that Voltaire's first stint in the Bastille came in 1717 for insulting the nephew of Louis XIV, just a taste of his lifelong feud with censorship. You crouch behind a low table as a printer face half hidden by a flour-smeared cap carefully lines up his type. The tick tick of metal against wood punctuates hushed whispers about the latest pamphlet, Le Testament de Monsieur Asterisk. You can almost feel the anticipation crackle like static in the air as the first copy rolls from the press. Marginalia mocked up royal seals, stamped upside down, gleam red against crisp sheets. There's a fringe rumor circulating that Voltaire once demanded his pamphlets be sprinkled with crushed insect wings to make them sparkle like forbidden jewels. Historians still argue whether that actually happened or was a printer's tall tale meant to lashen up sales in smoky taverns. The room warms quickly under the press's iron belly, and the scent of hot paper mingles with sweat and smoldering. Candlewick? You lean in, catching a snippet of the pamphlet's opening lines. Sire, you preside over eye-loinged finances as gracefully as a goat on a high wire. The line draws a murmur of suppressed laughter from the assembly 5 or 6 gaunt scholars hunched over barrels of ink before one hisses to keep the volume low. You swallow, momentarily tasting the bittersweet temps of dissent, as stacked sheets emerge. You notice these pamphlets are bound for 2 destinations, a network of ink-stained garrets in Parisian backstreets, and an underground book fair in Lyon, where merchants will risk prison to sell a few dozen copies. It's widely acknowledged that by the time of his death in 1778, Voltaire had authored more than 2,000 pamphlets, plays, and philosophical letters, many of which were never officially published in France, but circulated through Geneva and Amsterdam presses. You stroke a freshly printed page, the text soft under your fingertips and still warm to the touch. Like a secret handshake with history, the printer hands you a bundle wrapped in brown paper for delivery. You step back outside, the early sun slicing the fog and slanted beams. As you wind through narrow lanes, you pass opulent mansions whose ornate facades glint in the light homes of courtiers secretly slipping coins to these very printers. On a hidden corner, you duck into a crowded cafe where powdered-wigged aristocrats lean in to exchange leaflets under hushed breath. You push a pamphlet across the table, feeling the thrill of subversion buzzing under porcelain cups of steaming chocolate. A duchess glances your way, pale with guarded excitement. She nods imperceptibly, and you smile back before melting into the crowd. A caroler's distant melody drifts from a street performer's hurdy-gurdy, adding a surreal pop-pora vibe to your errand. You duck into another back room where copies are being hand-torn to smaller, broadsides balloon-like singles meant to be pasted on walls overnight. 3 quiet laughs bubble up, one at picturing Voltaire himself pasting lamppost broadsides in full-court regalia, another at the idea of a royal decree banning lamppost flyers, and a third at smugglers timing their paste jobs between church bells. By mid-morning, you find yourself in a plush salon in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. The walls lined with silk tapestries and gilded mirrors reflecting the gossip of the day. You step over rugs thick as clouds, settling into a cushioned armchair next to the hostess, a sharp-tongued widow known for her clandestine literary soirees. Round a low table, philosophers sip perfumed tea and nibble sugared almonds, while reciting Voltaire's latest jabs at ecclesiastical corruption. The hostess leans close. Her voice lays soft. Did you read the paragraph on the Holy Throne? It's so beautifully venomous. A slim man in spectacles nods emphatically, his elbow twitching with zeal. These salons are ground zero for Enlightenment, idea safe havens where Voltaire's censored pamphlets are read aloud. It's dissected like gourmet delicacies and dissected again with furious delight. It's a proven fact that his witty epigrams and biting satires endeared him to nobles and commoners alike. It's fueling intellectual cross-pollination across Europe. Yet some claim Voltaire's salon gatherings were more about pomp than genuine progress. A fringe critique arguing he curated an exclusive club of elites rather than mass mobilizing the populace. Historians still argue whether these salons truly democratized debate or merely repackaged it for aristocratic consumption. You lean in to overhear a heated exchange. One guest arguing that Voltaire's satire undermined absolute monarchy, while another insists it merely amused kings who secretly admired his wit. The discussion crackles like a live wire, and you sense the salon's dual role as incubators of revolutionary thought and as ornate theater for polite subversion. You feel a ripple of giddiness, imagining the salon walls adorning marginal doodles of kings with donkey ears, another fringe rumor that scribes sometimes defaced official prints with caricatures before passing them on. The hostess casts a conspiratorial glance your way, and you mirthfully wonder if this scene isn't the first true book club. Complete with swirling smoke and pretentious air, your bundle of pamphlets dwindles as you distribute them, one to a playwright returning from the Comédie Française, another to a freckled printer's apprentice who tucks it under his shirt with shining eyes. Each handoff carries the weight of both irony and revolution, a powder keg wrapped in linen sheets, as you prepare to depart. The hostess offers a final piece of gossip. Did you hear he asked to be buried in his socks so he could tap dance? In his grave. Another light laugh escapes you, though it's as likely fringe myth as fact. Historians still argue whether Voltaire truly made that unconventional request, or if it's a playful apocryphal flourish added by later biographers. To match his irreverent spirit, you step back into the sunlight, the city's heartbeat pulsing through narrow arteries of trade and treason. You tuck the last pamphlet into a brass notice box, one destined to challenge convoys of soldiers, and you exhale, tasting the thrill of words that slip past ironclad censorship into public mind space. The bells of Saint-Etienne ring for noon, chiming like a countdown to the next illicit edition. You pivot toward the Louvre's looming silhouette, already shifting through time toward Section 6, where Rousseau awaits exile and literary legacy. You slide from the gilded salons of Paris into a rickety coach rattling away from Geneva's city gates just before dawn, mist curling off the lake like a ghostly sheet. Next to you, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's cloak is still damp from evening dew, his pen poised above a fresh folio, in which he's just etched the final passages of the social contract. You probably won't survive this. Criticizing your own city's magistrates often ends with a hastily packed bag and a clandestine midnight departure. The crisp alpine air teases your lungs with pine resin and fresh hay. Somewhere behind you, bells toll the hour, quang like distant arguments over the general will. As the wheels clatter over cobblestones, you catch Rousseau's eyes flicking toward the receding ramparts. He murmurs that freedom is a pact between equals, not a gift bestowed by kings, a mainstream fact that, upon its anonymous 1762 publication, got the social contract banned in both Paris and Geneva within weeks. The ban arrives moments later, nailed to every cathedral door. Exile or imprisonment for its author. You grip the edge of your seat as the coach jolts, imagining Voltaire's pamphlet presses humming in Parisian back rooms, ready to reprint every incendiary line, a callback to those gaslit presses where satire once roared. 3 soft laughs escape you, one at picturing Rousseau live streaming his escape on some proto-TikTok platform, another at his quill squeaking like a restless mouse on parchment, and a third at the absurdity of a fugitive philosopher requesting a 5-star inn upon arrival in Neuchâtel. By mid-morning, you cross into Savoy, wind blowing stray strands of your hair as you traverse fields dotted with grazing sheep. A fringe rumor surfaces that Rousseau once disguised himself as a shepherd, reciting long passages of Emile to bewildered villagers who thought him mad rather than revolutionary. Historians still argue whether this escapade actually happened, or if it's a later invention to cast him as nature's bard. You inhale the sweet stink of manure and wildflowers, marveling at how this exiled mind finds kinship with simple pastoral life, even as capitals buzz with his ideas. Your coach glides into Annecy, its pastel houses sloping toward the water like scribbled footnotes. You help Rousseau down, his boots heavy with mud, inside a small inn. He orders a pot of bouillon and plucks a sprig of thyme from the windowsill, insisting nature's own seasoning beats any Parisian spice blend. A waiter brings the soup steaming in a chipped earthenware bowl, and you lean over to taste its earthy warmth, imagining future readers digesting his words with similar hunger. That evening, you slip into a local study lit by a single candle. The social contract sits on a shelf, its spine brittle from hurried presses in Geneva, Amsterdam, and London. You finger the binding, each copy a passport of dissent crossing borders. Rousseau runs a fingertip over the title page and whispers, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." You feel a shiver, as though the candle flame itself trembles at the line's audacity. 3 light laughs surface, one picturing Rousseau's quote engraved on protest signs centuries later, another imagining him autographing posters at modern rallies, and a third at the thought of him retweeting Robespierre in a moment of irony. The following morning, word arrives that monarchs and ministers in Vienna and St. Petersburg are secretly debating whether the social contract justifies uprisings in their own realms. It's a well-documented fact that within months of publication, discussions of the general will echo in salons from Berlin's Frederikscourt to London's coffeehouses. Yet some claim Rousseau had no intention of inciting revolution, that he merely sought moral reform, not regicide. Historians still argue whether his doctrine of popular sovereignty inadvertently laid groundwork for the French Revolution, or if his lush prose misled firebrands. You tilt your head, picturing those debates crackling like electrostatic sparks in candlelit parlors. At noon, your party boards a small bateau's mouche for a swift crossing of Lake Geneva, the water smooth as polished copper. You sit beside Rousseau, watching storm clouds gather over the Jura Mountains. Their outlines shifting like his own reputation hero to some dangerous demagogue to others. A tuft of hair falls into your soup earlier. Do you recall Spinoza's licorice jar? And you joke that Rousseau might trade his time sprig for a root of anise if he knew how you cling to quirky details. He smiles, adjusting his hat against the wind. Once ashore, you part ways near Lausanne's bustling quay. Hug Rousseau goodbye as he drifts into anonymity among commoners, his cloak blending with merchants' bundles. You slip gradually back into the world, into Paris's salons where the text is cupped in silken hands. Into London's coffee-scented rooms where debates erupt over citizens' rights. Into Berlin's candlelit libraries where Frederick the Great ponders whether to cite the social contract in his own reforms. Your mind drifts to earlier journeys. Socrates sipping hemlock in a dank cell. Boethius murmuring consolations beside a dying flame. Bruno blazing against dogma. Spinoza polishing lenses of reason. Voltaire's presses spitting out jabs at crown and church. Each carried words that outlived walls, tribunals, and exiles. Now, Rousseau's text sails from one capital to the next. A raft of ideas beating against the barricades of power. 3 gentle laughs echo as you consider how Rousseau once requested to be buried under a rose bush so he'd grow into nature, a request as improbable as a tortoise delivering manuscripts. Fringe stories say his epitaph read, "Here lies a man who fled his home but haunted every court." Historians still argue whether such epitaphs ever existed or if they're fanciful additions by those who adored his myth. A thought flickers: if he had Twitter, would he ghost tweet from beyond the grave? As evening falls, you imagine Rousseau's exile giving him both peril and poetic license, a paradox he embraced fully. You rise from your chair in a silent room, candle guttering. Carrying this final image, a solitary writer on the shore of a vast lake, pen in hand, sending ripples across continents. You cross from misty Swiss lakes into the brisk air of late 18th century Kingsburg. It's the East Prussian capital where spires pierce a steely sky and barges drift on the Pregel River like silent bargainers of ideas. Your boots click against flagstones. Frost crisp from an overnight chill, and a waft of burning peat mingles with the tang of chalk dust from schoolrooms. You probably won't survive this. Stealthily handling unsanctioned manuscripts in Prussia could land you in a dungeon reserved for political deviants. As you round a corner, you spy the modest brick facade of Kant's family home, framed by neatly trimmed hedges and a clock tower whose chimes govern the town's rhythm. Like a celestial metronome, you slip through a low door into the narrow vestibule where a mahogany cabinet bristles with quills and a brass number 4 glints beneath candlelight. Inside Kant's study, a heavy oak desk bears stacks of unpublished papers, drafts of an appendix to Critique of Pure Reason that Kant never dared release. This masterpiece, first published in Leipzig in 1781 under rigorous Prussian censorship, locked the world's mind onto a new orbit of knowledge. Tonight, though, you're here for the secret addendum, radical speculations on practical idealism that could have appended social order. The air is thick with the scent of burning tobacco, and starched linen. Kant's jacket, hanging by the door, smolders faintly from a newly snuffed pipe. You inhale and feel your thoughts sharpen as though Kant's own critical faculties are lancing through the haze. A narrow window creaks open to a courtyard where a solitary lantern sways. Beyond the glass, you glimpse Kant's famed meticulousness. In miniature hedgehogs, he once attempted to catalog by scale arrangement, lined up like living abacuses along the garden wall. Some say he kept a tame hedgehog named Minerva that scurried among his manuscripts, nibbling stray crumbs, an odd pet for a philosopher obsessed with pure reason. Historians still argue whether Minerva ever existed or is a latecomer's allegory. To illustrate Kant's blend of warmth and precision, You shiver at the thought of a prickly study assistant traipsing through your footnotes. You settle onto a cushioned chair, its velvet threadbare from decades of discussion, and reach for a loose sheet marked Verabdruck in Kant's spidery hand. As you unfurl it, you catch a fragment that reads, "Without moral postulates, no true freedom emerges." A notion that Kant never published but whispered about in lectures. A mainstream fact. His doctrine of virtue in the Critique of Practical Reason laid the groundwork for modern deontology, insisting that moral law arises from rational duty rather than divine command. Yet here, in this hidden draft, he speculates that collective action based on universal maxims could justify societal redistribution, a proposal that, if exposed, would have enraged both crown and clergy. A distant clock tolls the half-hour, sonorous boom rippling through the study. You lean forward, tracing a marginal scribble, a tiny symbol of scales balanced against an owl, a whimsical emblem possibly signifying his love for Greek logic. A fringe rumor contends that Kant composed an unpublished tract on Platonic communism, distributing clandestine pamphlets to local artisans. Historians still argue whether these clandestine whispers are fact or folklore. You stifle a soft laugh. It's picturing Kant handing out mini-manifests, wrapped like candy in Kingsburg's bakeries. 3 light jokes flit through your mind, imagining Kant's daily routine broadcast on a YouTube vlog called Eat, Sleep, Kant, Repeat. Picturing him scrolling through modern comment sections under his own essays, exasperated by flame wars on categorical versus hypothetical imperatives, and envisioning him using a spreadsheet to plan moral experiments. Column A, duty. Column B, utopian mayhem. Each joke diffuses the electric tension in the room, reminding you that even a titan of philosophy harbored a human grain of wonder. Your fingertips brush over an embossed leather binding labeled Gesammelschriften, the collected works, locked away under state seal. You wonder at the sheer trust Kant placed in Prussian censors to stifle any hint of social radicalism. Scholars' cautionary tale. It's well documented that Kant submitted his critique to the Kingsburg censorship board, revising passages on metaphysics to appease officials, sacrificing some of his boldest claims. Yet here, in private, he let his pen roam freer, sketching ideas on democratic assemblies and educational reform ideas that prefigure 19th century liberalism as the lantern gutters. You rise and tiptoe across a Persian rug that muffles your steps. You pause by a tall mahogany bookcase, whose shelves sag with volumes of Locke, Hume, and Rousseau, very thinkers who shaped Kant's critical turn. You recall how Rousseau fled Geneva's exile, how Voltaire's pamphlets danced under cafe tables, how Spinoza's lens revealed a God synonymous with nature. Now you trace Kant's silent dialogue with each predecessor. The margins of this room humming with intellectual counterpoint. A sudden rap at the door startles you. You slip the hidden manuscript into your coat pocket as Kant's student, a pale youth in owl-feathered hair, peeks in. His expression betrays both excitement and dread. Rumors swirl that the Academy plans to expel anyone caught importing unsanctioned texts. Historians still argue whether Kant orchestrated these secret sessions himself, or if eager disciples risked punishment to glimpse forbidden drafts. You give the student a quick nod. He retreats into the corridor, clutching a single page marked Zumdruck freigegeben, ready for print. It's the first spark of revolution, flickering in candlelit curiosity. You step outside into a narrow alley where horse hoofbeats echo in the damp air. The city's outlines blur in the dim phosphorescence of the river mists. You unfold the manuscript and run a fingertip over Kant's closing lines. Reason must dare to legislate the world. A final sketch at the bottom of cobblestone street, morphing into a bookshelf, suggests the world itself is a text awaiting interpretation. You fold the paper, tucking it carefully into your satchel, the rustle of parchment echoing like a latent argument, craving an audience. 3. Soft laughs, trail. Behind you, one at the thought of Kant's ghost haunting Prussian archives, another. Picturing him lecturing modern bureaucrats on GDPR privacy is a categorical imperative. And a third, at the absurdity of him scheduling cross-time zone Zoom calls to debate metaphysics. The humor lingers like tobacco smoke, warming your chest as you navigate returning shadows. You leave Kant's study behind, its lantern guttering out, and emerge beneath the muted glow of a single street lamp. The night air tastes of damp stone and unspoken questions. You finger the manuscript in your pack, feeling its weight as an ember for future minds. And as you slip away along Königsberg's silent quay, the clock tower's distant chime lingers, marking the moment when reason whispered against the strict walls of state control. You leave Kant's lantern-lit streets behind and drift into early 19th century Berlin, where the scent of freshly baked Schwarzbrot mingles with the acrid tang of coal smoke from endless factories. The city hums like a mechanical heartbeat, each clatter of horse-drawn omnibus wheels echoing the restless energy of a nation on the brink of modernity. You probably won't survive this. Criticizing Prussian state doctrine in these parts can get you blacklisted or worse. Quietly reassigned to a provincial teaching position in Königsberg. As you weave through wide boulevards lined with neoclassical pillars, you feel the weight of authority pressing on every stone. Just as Bruno felt the Inquisition's eyes or Spinoza bristled under Chatham, before you stands the grand faculty of the University of Berlin, newly founded in 1810, under royal decree, with its vast columns and banner proclaiming Rege Prussia above the entrance. Inside, scholars in sober tailcoats and high collars whisper about Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. It's the recently appointed professor whose lectures on logic and spirit are already attracting both admiration and suspicion. You slip into auditorium A, where stiff benches creak under the weight of earnest students scribbling feverishly. At the front, Hegel paces like a conductor before his orchestra, chalk dust puffing from his fingers as he inscribes complex diagrams on a blackboard. His hair flies back in wind-tough snow spa treatment for this philosopher. It's just a swirl of febrile genius. He halts, turns to the class, and declares with a voice as smooth as polished granite. The development of freedom is the sole end of history. You feel the air crackle, as though lightning has struck neon in a midnight sky. That statement, a mainstream fact in his 1820 philosophy of right, walked a razor's edge. On one hand, it justified the Prussian state as the embodiment of ethical life, and on the other hand, it hinted at a universal emancipation that could undermine absolutism. Around you, quills scratch in unison, each student parsing contradictions like delicate clockwork. You recall Socrates' challenge to define virtue, Boethius' plea to the printed muse, and Rousseau's fugitive pact. Now you witness Hegel navigating a philosophical tightrope under the watchful eye of censors, appointed by King Frederick William III. A faint clatter at the back draws your gaze. A rumor circulates that Hegel kept a diminutive capuchin monkey in his study, dressing it in a miniature frock coat so it could accompany him on late-night revisions of the phenomenology of spirit. Historians still argue whether this monkey was real or merely a metaphorical gadget conjured by his students to illustrate the mind's instinctual stage. You stifle a soft laugh at the mental image of a primate perched on a stack of Hegel's manuscripts, chattering critiques about absolute spirit. As the lecture concludes, you slip behind heavy drapes into Hegel's private study, an austere room with shelves sagging under the weight of his collected works, each spine stamped with the crown's seal of approval. The air smells of smoldering snuff and fresh paper. By lamplight, Hegel sits at a narrow desk, pen hovering over a fresh sheet of foolscap marked Offsatz gegen die Censur, an essay critiquing censorship itself, though it will never see print. A mainstream fact: Prussian censors required any manuscript on political philosophy to be submitted for review before publication, often redacting passages deemed too subversive. You see Hegel's own revisions scribbled in the margins. Lines are erased and replaced with elliptical dashes. Furtive lacunae where his true thoughts might have been. The desk trembles as a low wind rattles the leaded window panes. Of the city's gas lamps flickering outside, their glow paling against the steam of intellectual fervor within. Leaning over the script, you decipher a sentence he scratched out in the unity of state and spirit. The citizen finds absolute reconciliation or eventual insurrection. That line, if published, could have been seized as proof of sedition. You trace your finger across the words, feeling a thrill at the knowledge of this hidden coda to his official works. 3 gentle laughs bubble up. One imagining Hegel live streaming his censor's frantic red pen marks on YouTube. Another picturing him ordering a pizza delivery to the study with extra snuff on the side. And a third at the idea of him programming his monkey assistant to carry copies of banned passages in a tiny leather satchel. The humor cuts through the room's sobriety, reminding you that even a mind as lofty as Hegel's needs a touch of levity. You rise and wander toward a wall lined with maps of European states. Hegel points to the shifting borders of the Napoleonic Wars, waxing lyrical about the dialectic of conquest and restoration. His voice softens as he speculates that each state, like a syllable in a grand cosmic language, must pass through thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. A fringe whisper among students claims he kept a secret notebook of antinomies written in invisible ink, readable only by candlelight, heated at just the right angle. Historians still argue whether these invisible entries ever existed or if they're a fanciful apocrypha meant to mirror his dialectical method. You follow his hand as it glides over the map, your eyes tracing paths where armies once marched and vanished. The chalk dust from his lectures still clings to your fingertips like a residue of ideas too potent for safe handling. He turns to a wrought iron cage in the corner, the supposed home of the Capuchin, and taps it. The cage is empty, but a scrap of paper reads, "For spirit's freedom, even the beast must be unbound." You catch your breath at the poetic flourish. Was this note his or the monkey's? You tuck the scrap into your coat pocket, an artifact of clandestine philosophy. Outside, in a courtyard of lindens and newly cast statues of Prussian heroes, you overhear two merchants trading bootleg copies of Hegel's lectures on civil society transcripts smuggled out to the Rhineland. It's widely acknowledged that despite strict press laws, pirated versions of Hegel's work proliferated in Switzerland and Britain, where they ignited debates among early socialists. You watch a woman slip a folded pamphlet into her shawl, the ink still damp. 3 more light laughs escape. One picturing Hegel campaigning for open borders on a modern political talk show. Another imagining his phantom monkey heckling censors in Parliament. And a third at the thought of him subtweeting military officials in 280 characters as dusk settles. You return to the study where Hegel extinguishes the lamplight, leaving only the moon's pale glow filtering through the window. The room feels hushed, as if breath held under pressure. You sense that in these very shadows, the seeds of later revolutions were sown not just in France, but across Europe, when thinkers seized the dialectic as both sword and shield. You take a final glance at the blackboard scrawled with spiraling arrows and incomplete equations, his schematic of world history, a map of freedom yet to arrive. You step back into the chilly night, coal smoke curling around your shoulders like a silent shawl. The city sounds fade into distant footfalls and punctuated carriage wheels. You carry with you Hegel's hidden essays, the scrap of invisible ink lore, and the echo of that chalk-dusted declaration. The world spirit wields the Prussian state for its purpose. In your pocket, the banned pages whisper of contradictions that refuse to be silenced. And as you drift downstream along Unter den Linden, the faint chime of a clock tower transforms into a dial, turning the gears of history. Each tick a prompt to question authority all over again. You slip from Berlin's gaslit avenues into a rattling, time traveler's carriage that deposits you in London's soot-choked East End. 1848. The dawn air tastes of coal, dust, and brine from the Thames, sharp enough to slice through your overcoat. You probably won't survive this. Distributing subversive manifestos under the watchful eye of Victorian constables can land you in a dank cell, or worse. You remember Socrates sipping hemlock with calm defiance, Boethius weaving his solace by candlelight, Bruno blazing against dogma, Spinoza banished, Voltaire's pamphlets smuggled, Rousseau exiled, Kant's secret drafts, and Hegel's suppressed accessal ancestors in the rebellion of thought. Now, you press your palm against a damp brick wall and descend a narrow staircase, where muffled voices and the rhythmic thrum of a printing press greet you like a clandestine heartbeat. At the bottom, a low ceiling drips moisture onto scuffed wooden floorboards strewn with ink-smudged cloths. A single oil lamp swings from a hook, casting dancing shadows across racks of typecases and heaps of freshly printed leaflets. You inhale the acrid sting of wet paper warmed under iron rollers. In the corner, two burly dockworkers' shirt sleeves. Rolled to the elbow stacked bundles of pamphlets marked with the title red-stamped in German, The Communist Manifesto. It's a mainstream fact that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels thought this incendiary tract in Brussels and commissioned its first run in London in February 1848. Under the aegis of the clandestine Communist League, by nightfall, state censors in Berlin, Vienna, and Paris had banned it outright, condemning its call for proletarian revolution as high treason. You crouch beside the press, fingertips brushing coarse broadsheets that ripple like restless specters. A printer face dusted with typographical soot nods at you, sliding a fresh sheet into the machine. You catch a fringe whisper. Some radicals insist Marx once trained a canary to perch on his shoulder, singing when secret police approached. Though scholars still argue whether that yellow sidekick ever really existed or was invented later as a colorful allegory. The machines, gears, click-clack, each revolution imprinting a manifesto meant to ignite uprisings across Europe. You can almost taste the thrill of pamphlets slipping into workers' pockets like forbidden candy. One of the dockworkers hands you a neat stack bound with twine. You cradle them lovingly, marveling at the weight of ideas that could overturn thrones. In this dim room, you feel the pulse of smuggled knowledge, editions bound for Parisian back alleys, Brussels coffee houses, and clandestine reading circles in Austrian factories. You're aware that by March, whispers of the manifesto's slogans, "Workers of the world, unite," will echo in barricaded streets during the revolutions of 1848, proving that words can be as potent as muskets. Historians still argue whether the manifesto directly sparked these uprisings or merely resonated with a pre-existing tide of discontent. Three soft laughs slip out as you imagine Marx himself in a top hat. Live-tweeting peasants storming a barricade, #proletariat power. Trending in 1848, you smile at the mental image of Engels, slipping pamphlets wrapped in sausage skins to outwit customs inspectors, or a cigarette-smoking dockhand intoning passages over a roaring forge as if reciting poetry. And you chuckle at picturing a modern YouTube ad. Like and subscribe if you want a classless society. Offer ends when the state arrests us. With your bundle secured, you climb the stairs and step into a damp alley strewn with horse droppings and lamppost flyers demanding equal rights. The morning fog clings to your cheeks as you wind through labyrinthine courts, careful to avoid patrolling bobbies. You pause at a narrow doorway bearing the sign Working Men's Club. Inhale the mingled scents of stale ale and fried potatoes and slip inside. A low buzz of discussion greets you. Men in threadbare waistcoats gather over chipped mugs, reading scrawled leaflets by candlelight. You hear a factory hand grunt with approval at the call to abolish private property. Shoemaker mutters about the urgency of seizing the means of production. 3 muted laughs bubble up. One at picturing these debates as a 19th century podcast. Another at imagining Marx pitching the manifesto's chapters as keynote slides. And a third at hearing Engels grumble about subscription fees for his next pamphlet. A woman in a bonnet, her cheeks rouged by cold wine, leans forward to ask who produced this text. He whispers Marx's name, and she tilts her head, quoting him, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles." The club falls silent, a hush hung on that statement's precision. A mainstream truth. Those opening lines, delivered with surgical clarity, became the manifesto's most enduring signature, recited in crowds from Geneva's lakeshore to Naples' plazas. Yet some claim this phrase was originally longer. Later trimmed by Engels for brevity, scholars to debate whether the original manuscript contained more elaborate preamble. Beyond the club's back window, you glimpse a lamplighter ascending a ladder to ignite the street's glow. You slip out, pressing bundles against your chest, and melt into the labyrinth of side streets. Somewhere ahead, a coach-bound aristocrat will brush past you, oblivious to the revolution tucked beneath your overcoat. You recall Voltaire's satire. Barging past royal censors, Rousseau's social contract traveling from capital to capital. And Hegel's suppressed criticism muttering in Kingsburg's shadows. Now it's your turn to become a vessel for these fermenting ideas. By dusk, you reach a wharf where a flatboat rocks gently against its moorings. You hand a dozen pamphlets to a crewman who shoves them beneath sacks of coal destined for Chartist meetings in Manchester. You hold him by the elbow, whispering that the manifesto's cry for an 8-hour workday may resonate across mills and smelters alike. He grins, revealing a missing tooth, and slides the flyers into the black bunker where smoke and pamphlets mingle, bound for clandestine distribution. 3 final laughs skid through your mind. One at picturing Marx's beard tangled in smokestack soot. Another at imagining Engels texting back LOL in the margins of his notes. And a third imagining modern scholars poring over coal-stained pages in archives. You watch the boat push off, its bulk funneling your pamphlets downriver toward new battalions of readers, dock workers, miners, domestic servants, anyone with calloused hands and dreams larger than their paychecks. The sky glows orange as gas. Lamps flicker on. Silhouette merges with shifting shadows on the quay. You feel a surge of possibility. This basement's press is as vital as Socrates' stone cell, Oethius's prison villa, or Bruno's pyre. Ideas, once pressed and bundled, evade even the tightest bands. You stroll away under a moonlit sky now, smeared with city haze, pockets still whispering with band pages itching for new eyes. Each step echoes the suppressed voices of history's banned philosophers, a chorus carried by flickering lamppost light. And as you vanish into London's murmuring night, you tuck in your cufflink tiny gear from the printing press, feeling its ridges like braille of defiance. You slip over cobblestones and rolling meadows to arrive at a crisp German summer evening in 1888, settling outside Friedrich Nietzsche's modest study in Sils Maria. High in the Engadin Alps, the air is thin and scented with pine, resin, and a hint of cowbell musk from distant alpine farms. You probably won't survive this. Espousing radical critiques of morality in Wilhelmine Germany can earn you more than public disdain. Just ask any forgotten salon speaker. As you settle on a rough-hewn bench beneath a flickering oil lamp, you notice Nietzsche's silhouette hunched over a sheaf of papers, the lamplight casting long, dancing shadows of his trademark mustache along the wooden walls. Inside the room, smells of musty vellum and stale tobacco's outlaw twin in this setting. Since Nietzsche once scolded smoking as a sin against reason. You step across a threadbare rug and find his latest manuscript draft. Beyond Good and Evil, pages scrawled with his scathing aphorisms on master and slave moralities. It's a mainstream fact that Nietzsche published Beyond Good and Evil in 1886, provoking outrage and fascination alike by dissecting the origins of Western ethics. His pen strokes, dark and jagged, feel like they're carving new valleys across your own moral landscape. On a low table sits a glass carafe half full of sour Riesling, a reminder of his fondness for drinking dry white wine at dawn. A quirky detail that had friends tiptoeing in to deliver morning letters, lest the clink of glass shatter his poetic trance. Historians still argue whether that Riesling ritual sharpened his intellect or simply gave him dreadful hangovers that fed his melancholic genius. You tip your head back to imagine Nietzsche leaning into the bottle, grin splitting across his face as he mutters, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." A gust rattles the window shutters, and you lean forward to catch the rustle of a tiny notebook lying open beside a cracked teacup. Flicking through, you discover an unpublished fragment titled Will to Power as Political Blueprint. Heavily redacted in places where Nietzsche first toyed with the idea of aristocratic leadership. He erased key passages before sending manuscripts to his publisher, anticipating censorship under strict imperial edicts against immoral literature. The deleted sections led Bavarian authorities to ban his writings from certain libraries in 1895, chalking them up as dangerous erotica rather than revolutionary philosophy. You trace faded pencil marks beside a margin note. God is dead. Now, let us redraw the map. Even here, the phrase vibrates with restless energy, like an echo in a vast cavern. 3 light laughs slip free. One picturing Nietzsche live tweeting that proclamation hashtag God is dead, trending in 1886. Another at the idea of him running a late-night ASMR channel, whispering aphorisms over crackling fire sounds. And a third at imagining him placing morbidly self-aware memes under his pillow for midnight inspiration beyond the desk. A small brass cage clanks softly. Inside perches a taxidermied pet cheetah. A fringe rumor cemented by an 1882 portrait of Nietzsche, standing beside a snarling big cat supposedly gifted by a wealthy admirer. Historians still argue whether that wild beast ever prowled his apartment or if it was merely a theatrical prop meant to mirror his celebration of raw, untamed instincts. The stuffed cheetah's glass eye gleams in the lamp's glow, as if silently urging you to embrace your own primal longings. You roll your shoulders, recalling the flattened vistas of Socrates' trial chamber, Boethius's firelit villa, and Bruno's pyre, that cosmic blaze stirring rebellion under the stars. Nietzsche's battlefield is subtler, the realm of morality itself, where he wields linguistic scalpels to expose hidden power dynamics. On the wall hangs a framed excerpt. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. The line is so familiar it feels like wallpaper, yet here it pulses with fresh menace. You step to the window, breathing in the chill night air, and hear the distant toll of St. Moritz's church bell, each chime a reminder. That time surges forward even when ideas sink into obscurity. In the valley below, The glow of lantern-lit farms twinkles like fireflies, nature's own philosopher's stones. Nietzsche's gaze drifts to that horizon, and he murmurs about the eternal recurrence, a thesis some considered so metaphysical that, after his collapse in 1889, Bavarian psychiatrists labeled him incurably insane. Yet fringe accounts claim that in those final years he scribbled secret dictations to his sister, including plans to rewrite his entire corpus as a hymn to the Bermenge. Scholars still argue whether Elizabeth's heavy editing no mitting, or altering anything she saw as politically inconvenient, corrupted his true voice, or simply polished his prose for a broader audience. A sudden clink on the desk draws your eye. Nietzsche's reading spectacles perched atop a well-worn copy of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Its pages bear notes in his angular hand, critiques of the crowd-pleasing tone of his own book. You chuckle softly at the paradox. He chastised himself for narcissism, even as he exalted self-overcoming. Imagine a stand-up comedian heckling his own set mid-performance, and another laugh escapes when you picture him adding emojis beside his most ferocious sentences, a sly wink or a flame icon marking his hotter aphorisms in hushed tones. Nietzsche confides that he's worried his ideas might be misappropriated by rising nationalist movements on irony that would prove all too real when, decades after his death, the Nazi regime cherry-picked quotes to champion Aryan supremacy. It's an undeniable twist of fate. Writings once banned for immorality later became textbooks for totalitarian indoctrination. Historians still argue whether Nietzsche himself, who abhorred anti-Semitism, would have recoiled at this grotesque hijacking, or if his disdain for democracy made him partially complicit in sowing these seeds. You sense the weight of that betrayal, heavy as the stone walls confining philosophical dissent. Yet, Nietzsche's eyes gleam with resilient mischief. He taps a battered edition of Beyond Good and Evil, remarking that the true tragedy is not the perversion of one's words, but the complacency of readers who swallow slogans without nuance. 3 gentle laughs flicker. One at imagining him ranting in a modern book club, scoffing at participants for quoting him out of context. Another picturing him filing a cease on desist against extremist YouTube channels. And a third at the absurd thought of him ghostwriting a scathing Wikipedia talk page. Rebuttal. You straighten and cross to a corner where a battered trunk lies half open, revealing unpublished letters to Richard Wagner, rife with both admiration and pacifying critique. Those letters linger in obscurity because Nietzsche feared they would brand him either a Wagnerian disciple or traitor, labels he detested equally. It's well known that in 1888, after a nervous breakdown, he never wrote again. Yet inside this trunk, you find one final letter, colored in purple ink. It's addressed to all future readers, warning them to safeguard this text from those who would make me a martyr or a monster. You swallow, feeling that solemn charge pass from his tremulous hand into your own. Stepping back into the frosty night, you tuck the purple-lettered sheet into your coat pocket, the ink still damp. The alpine breeze carries the echo of his last verse, live dangerously. You fold your arms around yourself, both chilled and exhilarated. In your mind, you trace the arc from Socrates' death sip to Boethius's consolations, from Bruno's flames to Spinoza's lenses, from Voltaire's presses to Marx's manifestos, now Nietzsche's uneasy legacy, a torch both illuminating and incendiary as you mount a small carriage waiting at the gate. You feel the cheetah's glass stare lingering on your shoulders. The driver urges you onward, and you glance back once more at that glowing window where a banned philosopher once dared to rethink morality's foundations. 3 final laughs drift in your chest. One at imagining Nietzsche's spectral spin on modern motivational posters, Become Who You Are. Another at picturing him ordering room service for a midnight snack of pickled herring. And a third At the notion of him rolling his eyes at his own posthumous meme-fication, the carriage rattles away down the winding mountain road, leaving Nietzsche's study and the specter of misused philosophy behind. You inhale the cold night air, letting his call to live dangerously echo in your bones, ready to carry forward the unvarnished truths that refuse to stay banned. You slip through a hidden door in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, stepping from cobbled streets into the smoky embrace of a Parisian cafe in 1949. The air hums with the hiss of espresso machines and the tang of cigarette smoke mingled with spilled red wine, an intoxicating cocktail of intellectual fervor. You probably won't survive this, challenging entrenched gender norms in post-war France can get you ostracized by church and state alike, as you sink into a scarred leather banquette. You feel the cafe's buzz wrap around you like a rebellious manifesto. 3 soft laughs slip free. One at picturing Simone de Beauvoir live-streaming her breakfast croissant critiques. Another, imagining her arguing with Sartre over who left acetylene lamps on too long. And a third, at the absurdity of a modern second sex book club, complete with power, ties, and Wi-Fi. Beauvoir sits at a corner table littered with crumpled drafts of Le Duim sex, its pages fluttering like impatient wings. You lean in to catch your fingers tapping rhythms on the mahogany surface, metronomic, urgent. Candlelight from a crooked sconce paints her face in chiaroscuro, highlighting the dark defiance in her eyes. It's a mainstream fact that the second sex was published in Paris on January 16, 1949, igniting debates on women's roles, sexuality, and existential freedom. Scribbled margin notes curl around dense paragraphs, where she unravels centuries of patriarchal myths and urges women to transcend immanence through authentic self-creation. You inhale the cafe's heady scent coffee, old leather, and the faint metallic temps of typewriter ink while Beauvoir pauses to scribble another revision. Between sips of steaming café au lait, she murmurs about the dialectic of oppressor and oppressed. A callback to Hegel's master-slave exchange and Marx's class struggles, but reframed through the lens of gender. Fringe whispers suggest she once trained a canary to belt out feminist slogans at critics who sneered at her work, a playful rebellion that may be more myth than reality. Historians still argue whether that bird ever existed or if it's a fanciful allegory for her unyielding will. You trace your fingertip across a manuscript page, where she debates the mystery of womanhood, challenging essentialist views that painted women as naturally passive. The chair creaks as a waiter in a starched white jacket glides by, carrying a silver tray of buttered pain, chocolature, own to taste. Its buttery flakiness melts on your tongue, crisp against the cafe's smoky haze, grounding you in the moment. You swallow, picturing Voltaire nibbling almonds in his salons, or Rousseau foraging for time by a misty lake-each philosopher forging paths through personal comfort zones, much as Beauvoir is doing here. Across the table, Beauvoir's lips curve into a half-smile as she crosses out mystical destiny and replaces it with existential project. She taps her pen on the edge of an ashtray, sending spirals of blue smoke toward a half-empty wine carafe stained ruby red. You inhale that fermented fruit aroma, feeling it swirl in your chest like a warm blush. 3 light jokes dance in your mind. One at imagining Beauvoir pitching her book to a modern TV network as game of gender roles. Another at picturing her responding to online trolls. Your misogyny is showing. And a third at the thought of her ghostwriting cheeky feminist tweets number. Hell hath no fury like a woman rewriting her own myth. A chill draft creeps through a gap in the window frame, carrying the distant echo of St. Sulpice's bells. Beauvoir closes her notebook and leans back, eyes drifting to a bookshelf behind the bar where existential classics Heidegger's Being and Time, Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenologist end in silent alignment. You recall how Kant polished his lenses to sharpen vision and how Spinoza blurred divine and natural in molten reason. Now you glimpse Beauvoir weaving philosophy and lived experience into a tapestry, both personal and universal. She tells you how the book was immediately attacked by conservative critics, labeled immoral for its frank discussion of female sexuality. Official censors in Belgium, Italy, and portions of Quebec banned it outright, fearful that women would awaken to their own agency. You feel the sharp sting of that ban, as though the pages themselves were wrenched from your hands. In the margins of clandestine reading circles, women's apartments strewn with embroidered pillows and candlelit desks, her words became gospel. Historians still argue whether these salons truly sparked the second wave feminist revolutions of the 1960s, or if they were more intimate gatherings of upper-class intellectuals. Beyond the cafe window, neon signs flicker onto rain-slicked pavements. A motorbike roars by, splashing puddles onto pedestrians clutching umbrellas and dog-eared copies of Beauvoir's text. Do you imagine her disdain for unexamined tradition, recalling her line, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman"? That phrase resonates like a strike of lightning, illuminating the dark canyons of gendered expectation. You lean forward as Beauvoir whispers about coded lesbian. Love notes, she slipped into early drafts marginalia of rose-colored ink and heart symbols. Fringe rumor claims she encoded entire confessions of desire between the lines, a private queer archive. Scholars still argue whether these intimate notes were genuine outpourings or poetic metaphors, added by later editors seeking to romanticize her life. Three soft laughs echo, picturing Beauvoir autographing the second sex in lipstick, imagining her complaining about mansplaining at an existentialist summit, and another at picturing her remixing her own text into a feminist Supreme Court brief. The humor ripples through the shadows, reminding you that even the most profound revolutions in thought are propelled by human quirks. Beauvoir collects her manuscripts, folding them carefully into an olive green canvas, satchel her bundle of banned hope. She stands, smoothing her wool overcoat, its collar turned up against the night chill. You step outside with her, breath clouding in the air. The street lamps cast a halo around your heads as you navigate narrow lanes, pages rumbling like restless birds beneath her arm. A stray cat darts past, and she murmurs a soft laugh. They all seek a place to belong. It strikes you as an echo of Socrates' search for virtue, of Boethius's quest for consolation, and of Spinoza's pantheistic embrace of the world. At a clandestine distribution hub, unmarked apartment with lace curtains, you help mainline bundles of ski second sex to eager readers who assemble in tight circles, legs folded on carpets, faces lit by a single bulb. Their hushed voices debate the ethics of motherhood and the politics of desire, voices trembling with newfound possibility. You hand a young seamstress a copy, her eyes shining like forged steel. She pats your hand and whispers, "We will rewrite ourselves." It's the purest form of revolution, as the night advances. You trace your path back through lantern-lit avenues, Beauvoir's satchel light against your side. You carry with you her whispered challenge to dismantle the myths that cage us. Recall Nietzsche's call to live dangerously, Marx's manifesto echoing in factory courtyards, and Voltaire's pamphlets smuggled past royal gates. Now it's Beauvoir's turn to unbind generations, 1 second at a time. You slip from the lace-curtained apartment where Beauvoir's banned manuscripts whisper in your satchel into a hushed lecture hall at the Collège de France in 1976. The heavy wooden door thuds closed behind you, muffling the Parisian traffic's distant roar. A faint haze of cigarette smoke and chalk dust lingers in the air, mingling with the metallic temps of overheating fluorescent lights. You probably won't survive this. Openly dissecting sexuality and power in post-May 68 France can land you in academic purgatory, at the very least, in the crosshairs of conservative censors, as you ease onto a bench worn smooth by decades of eager pupils. You feel the tension settle like a tight collar around your throat at the front. Michel Foucault stands beside a blackboard densely scribbled with genealogies of confession and discipline. His blazer hangs loosely off one shoulder. A ripple of impatience crosses his face as he flips a marker, ready to carve new lines into the history of desire. You catch a mainstream fact. In November 1976, Foucault published the first volume of History of Sexuality, subtitled The Will to Knowledge, challenging Western assumptions that sexuality naturally broke out once repression was lifted. Instead, arguing that power and discourse produce sexual identities. The book's arrival ignited debates that crackled through faculty lounges and frontline feminist protests alike. You inhale the low-burn heat of the hall. Taste the stale snap of chalk as Foucault underlines the word discursive, and feel the tiny tremor of excitement when he quotes classical penitentials laws that mandated public confession for every lustful thought. He traces an arc from medieval Inquisition manuals to modern psychology's couch, arguing that power doesn't merely repress sexuality, but invents the sexual subject through networks of control. A fringe whisper rustles through the audience. Some allege Foucault once hid miniature recording devices in Parisian public restrooms to observe unguarded conversations on desire. Historians still argue whether those devices ever existed or if they're urban legends spawned by his intense interest in hidden power structures. You press your palm against your thigh and stifle a laugh, picturing Foucault squatting behind a toilet partition with a tape recorder. 3 soft jokes drift through your mind. 1 at imagining Foucault live streaming this lecture on a 1970s version of Twitch hashtag power and pleasure, trending before hashtags existed. Another picturing him scribbling marginalia on his own text. LOL. Nice try, Freud. And a third at the absurdity of him commissioning a medieval scribe to hand copy his modern treatise, complete with illuminations of corsets and whips. These reveries puncture the gravity of the moment with small bursts of delight. The chalk squeaks as he erases a diagram and replaces it with a timeline of psychiatric diagnosis hysteria. Neurasthenia, homosexuality, each one emerging from institutional power rather than natural pathology. You lean closer, catching a whiff of turpentine used to clean the board, and you shiver. Beyond the lectern, an ornate arch frames the Paris skyline at dusk, cathedral spires jutting like denials of modernity. You pinch yourself. Here in this austere hall, Foucault reconfigures the sexual map of the West. He pauses, tapping his pen against the desk. Then quotes a recently declassified decree. In 1942, Vichy France required doctors to report any deviations from normal sexuality, stamping patients' files with euphemistic code words. The fact Foucault unearthed these archives, showing that modern psychiatry functioned as an arm of state surveillance. When that decree flickered on the screen behind him, you feel a cold flush. These weren't ancient relics, but policies that shaped your parents' world. Historians still argue whether Foucault's archival interventions were comprehensive or selective, accusing him of editing evidence to fit his genealogical narrative. Q nod, aware that every historian wields the red pen as deftly as Foucault wields his marker. At intermission, you slip into a narrow corridor lined with backstage doors. A guard's voice echoes, "No photographs." You pat your coat pocket around your neck. Hangs a battered Polaroid disguised as a badge butt, resists snapping a quick shot. Instead, you breathe in the corridor's musty chill and spot a fringe. Relic, an ancient chastity belt mounted like a museum piece behind glass. Next to it, an faded label claims it once belonged to an abbess who petitioned Rome for tighter fits. You grin at the dissonance. This relic of repression now presides over lectures deconstructing its very purpose. Back in the hall, the lights dim and Foucault resumes, his silhouette elongated on the rear wall. He discusses how the nascent disciplines of sexology in the late 19th century cataloged desires, classifying perversions with an obsession that mirrored colonial ethnography. You feel the wood grain of your bench imprint on your fingertips, each groove echoing the grooves in society's moral woodblocks. He intones that power is omnipresent, not because it dominates from a single source, but because it traverses capillary-like networks, families, schools, clinics, transforming lovers into subjects under constant scrutiny. You can almost taste the faint sweetness of a student's mint-flavored lollipop in the back row and the bitter tang of a professor's overboiled espresso served in chipped china cups. The lecture swells into an examination of how modern prisons, hospitals, and schools internalize surveillance, turning individuals into their own jailers. Foucault's voice rises. Power is exercised rather than possessed, and you feel it course through the benches, galvanizing a hush so profound you hear your own heartbeat. Ah. Fringe anecdote flits through your mind. Some say Foucault once organized secret midnight seminars in Parisian S&M clubs to immerse himself in lived power dynamics. Historians still argue whether these clandestine gatherings were actual fieldwork or myths spun by devoted disciples to amplify his legend. You stifle another smile at the idea of a leather-clad audience, furiously taking notes under strobe lights. 3 light laughs surface. One at picturing Foucault awarding extra credit for participants who could recite Deleuze's obscure film. Critiques another at imagining him hosting a modern podcast called Confess and Be Free, the true crime of desire. And a third at the notion of him requesting guest lectures delivered via VR headsets. Let's make power visible in 360 degrees. As the lecture closes, Foucault steps back, arms folded, inviting questions. You watch as a young scholar stands to challenge his emphasis on discourse over material conditions, sparking a fierce debate that crackles like static on an old radio. You bite your lip, recognizing echoes of Marx's class struggles and Hegel's dialectic reimagined for the sexual realm. Foucault listens with that trademark arched eyebrow, then smiles. Such contradictions are where the real work begins. The audience files out into the night air, buzzing with exhilarated confusion. You linger for a moment in the empty hall, chalk dust motes drifting like microscopic philosophers reluctant to leave. You brush your palm against the bench and feel the whisper of countless forbidden ideas stamped into its grain. Stepping back onto the rainy boulevard, the tea, you pull your coat tight against the chill. Neon reflections shimmer across wet asphalt, mirroring the electric charge still crackling in your mind. You recall Socrates' defiance in that dank cell, Boethius's consoling dialogues, Bruno's cosmic blaze, Spinoza's lustrous lenses, Voltaire's clandestine pamphlets, Rousseau's exiled laments, Kant's unreleased speculations, Hegel's suppressed essays, Marx's underground manifesto, Nietzsche's alpine provocations, and Beauvoir's feminist insurgency. Now Foucault adds another layer. Sexuality itself as a site of contested power. 3 gentle laughs warm you against the wind. One at picturing Foucault photocopying lecture notes on an illicit risograph machine. Another imagining him GTFOING. Prudish censors with a single tweet tiffed only. He'd had Twitter, and a third at the idea of him cameoing in a risk period drama. Sipping absinthe amid condoms stamped with the words, "Knowledge is power." You step into a nearby cafe to warm your hands around a steamy mug of hot chocolate modern comfort after a journey through centuries of suppressed thought. You cradle the cup, feeling the vibrations of Foucault's revelations seep into your bones. As you sip, you tuck a small brass key you found in the corridor into your paquita, symbol of unlocked doors in lecture halls and closets alike. Tomorrow, you'll drift into the world of Gramsci's prison notebooks, scribbled behind bars under fascist rule. But for now, you'll remain here, savoring the afterglow of Foucault's rebellion, an overthrow of the most intimate battleground of all. You stand at the edge of a sun-baked courtyard in Torri prison, southern Italy, the air heavy with dust and the faint temps of mildew from damp stone walls. You probably won't survive this. Befriending a political prisoner under Mussolini's watch can earn you a nickname on the secret police ledger. Beyond the iron bars of Cell 31, you see Antonio Gramsci hunched over a makeshift desk, a plank of wood, laid across to bricks, pen scratching furiously in one of the 33 prison notebooks he composed between 1929 and 1935 under fascist incarceration. The whisper of his handwriting cuts through the silence like a blade, each word forging theories that would outlast the regime intent on burying them. You catch the sulfurous scent of burning pitch from the guard tower's lamps, mingling with the salty sweat on your skin. Gramsci's notebook, bound in coarse burlap, lies open on the plank. He jots notes on cultural hegemony, arguing that true power operates through consent rather than force, a mainstream fact that later shaped Western Marxist thought. In the margins, you glimpse a fringe annotation. Rumor claims Gramsci mixed his ink with dissolved prison bread crusts to camouflage his writings when guards rifled through his cell. Historians still argue whether this bread ink trick was a clever smokescreen or simply a poetic myth dreamed up by admirers to highlight his resourcefulness. You stifle a soft laugh at the image of the prison, librarians sneezing at micro-sandwich sediment. The late afternoon light drips through narrow slits in the wall, falling across Gramsci's concentration-lined brow. His whisper is almost audible, as he muses on organic intellectuals rising from workers and peasants, scribbling in dialect to decode the codes of domination. You feel the chill of history pressing close, as though the walls themselves lean in to listen. A mouse scuttles across the dusty floor, pausing by Gramsci's boots, worn thin from the march to the court, now left unlaced. 3 light jokes bubble up. One at picturing Gramsci using those boots as the revolution's first delivery drones. Another at imagining him sending telegrams via carrier pigeon disguised into fellow inmates' trousers. And a third at him slipping love notes to his wife in the hollow sole of a bread crust. You trace a finger along the letters in his neat, tiny script. The challenge of modernity is to reconstruct every social institution from the standpoint of humanistic values. Phrase resonates like a soft hymn against the clank of distant machinery. Nearby, Gramsci stacks 3 notebooks under a tin basin to mask them during random searches, a nostalgic callback to Spinoza's lens polishing. Hiding philosophical tools in plain sight, you inhale the damp, earthy aroma of the courtyard's single-potted ivy, whose roots crack the stone floor much like his ideas crack the foundations of totalitarianism. A guard's boots echo on the corridor beyond, and you press closer to the bars. Gramsci slides a folded slip of paper through a gap in the bars, a letter to his wife, written in Italian and Sardinian dialect, warning her that his health is failing under confinement. It's a well-documented fact that tuberculosis ravaged him during his imprisonment, cutting short the final years of his life. The paper's edges are frayed, ink blurred at corners where dampness seeped through. You gently refold the note, picturing university students decades later studying this very fragment in seminar rooms. Cloaked in the faint aroma of chalk and tattered wool coats, you peer up at Gramsci's face, lit by a sliver of late sunshine. He halts his writing and glances your way, offering a slight nod, both greeting and warning. His eyes sparkle with defiance, as though daring you to believe that ideas can outlive jail cells. 3 quiet laughs flutter free, one at imaging him. Live blogging jail conditions on an early internet with dial-up screeches. Another at the mental image of a svelte Gramsci recruiting fellow inmates for a clandestine podcast called Prison Notebooks Unplugged. And a third at the notion of him doodling caricatures of Mussolini in the blank corners of his pages. The guard's footsteps fade away, leaving only the faint drip-drip of water from a leaky gutter above. You watch Gramsci resume writing, his pen racing to catch every nuance of the subaltern's consciousness, every flicker of class struggle beneath surface complacency. The courtyard's heat settles into a languid hush, the stones humming with unspoken solidarity. In that stillness, you almost feel the weight of his invisible audience miners in Pittsburgh. Students in Berlin, factory workers in Manchester each, mind quietly wrestling with his ideas. A breeze stirs the ivy tendrils overhead, rustling pages so lightly they whisper like old lovers. Gramsci pauses, presses his palm against the notebook, and dabs at a smudge with the corner of his sleeve. Then he closes the burlap cover with deliberate care. Another defensive measure against opportunistic censors who combed through mail. You recall how Foucault unearthed Vichy decrees, and how Beauvoir hid her lesbian confessions in rose-colored marginalia. Now it's Gramsci's turn, encoding resistance in the mundane act of notebook binding. You step back, heart thudding, as you pocket the letter to his wife. The courtyard light shifts, pulling long shadows across the ground like ink blots. A lone pigeon cooes overhead, wings flapping against barbed wire. 3 final light jokes drift in your head. One imagining Gramsci training pigeons to deliver his prison notebooks to unwitting sympathizers in Geneva. Another picturing him submitting amendments to the fascist constitution written in code. And a third at the absurdity of him starting a Kickstarter to fund hidden presses inside Tory's walls. As you turn to leave, the cadence of Gramsci's pen slows, the last 4 words of his notebook etching themselves into eternity. Ideas are stronger than swords. A shudder ripples through you, equal parts fear and exhilaration. You push open the heavy gate, the iron hinges groaning like a censor's conscience. Outside, the air cools into evening, carrying the scent of eucalyptus from a distant grove. You walk away, the letter and the burlap-scented memory of those notebooks tucked against your ribs. Each step echoes through time, a muffled drumbeat of solidarity. Beyond the prison walls, villages and cities slumber under flags that claim unity, but suppress dissent. Yet in every whispered discussion, every clandestine study group, compasses words, flicker compasses guiding a moral revolution. Above you, okay? Stars bloom in the dark sky, indifferent witnesses to the human struggle for freedom. You pause under a lone street lamp and let its glow wash over you, a final callback to the flickering lanterns in Kant's study and the torchlight at Bruno's pyre. You press your palm against your chest, feeling the pulse of ideas that refuse to stay locked away. The night air hums low as you melt into shadowed lanes, carrying the echo of Gramsci's defiance, that even behind bars, one can sow the seeds of cultural transformation. You step out of Tory prisons, echoing shadows, and, in a single breath, find yourself under a blazing Brazilian sun, the Atlantic breeze carrying the scent of salt and sugarcane fields. You trudge down a dusty lane in Recife Ward, a modest classroom where a battered blackboard waits like an open challenge. Inside, the air hums with humidity and the sharp temps of chalk, so thick you can taste it on your tongue. You probably won't survive this. Teaching impoverished peasants to read under Brazil's military regime can land you in Fortomo with Gramsci's notebooks, or worse. Disappear you into the Amazon's unknown depths. Still, here you are, Freire. Stands at the front, chalk in hand, tracing a curving spiral on the board labeled Conscientosago, as students lean forward on creaking wooden benches. His shirt sleeves are rolled up, revealing ink-stained wrist secos of Spinoza's lens, polish and Boethius's candlelit penmanship. He peppers his sentences with questions. What words define your world? That question ripples through the room like a tidal wave, toppling walls built by silence. A mainstream fact. Pedagogy of the Oppressed first circulated in Portuguese in 1968. And by 1969, Brazilian censors had deemed it so incendiary they banned it outright, consigning Freire to a brief prison stint and then to enforced exile. Yet here, in this sweltering classroom, his banned methodology breathes. You brush a bead of sweat from your brow and watch Freire smile as a young fisherman writes pescador. Under the chalk's white arc, the room smells of damp paper, mosquito, coil, smoke, and roasted cassava sensory cocktail as heady as any Parisian salon's coffee and cigarette haze. 3 gentle laughs escape you. One at picturing Freire demanding students repeat every new word karaoke style. Another at the idea of him live streaming a literacy rant on Instagram. Live hashtag read to rebel trending, and a third at imagining him calibrating his blackboard like a DJ scratching vinyl between exercises. Freire crouches to adjust a wooden crate under a palm trunk that props up a makeshift desk. You note a fringe whisper. Some claim he once trained a toucan named Paulo to squawk key vocabulary, alphabetizaco. Each time a student correctly decoded a phrase, historians still argue whether that bird ever lived or if it migrated. From folklore into a pedagogical myth designed to illustrate dialogical learnings, spontaneity. You grin at the mental image of a colorful toucan perched on Freire's shoulder, bobbing its head to the rhythm of literacy chants. He erases the board and sketches to overlapping circles. Here, he says, tapping the intersection, is where your reality meets language. His voice is calm but electric, like Socrates posing a question in a crowded agronly. Now the stakes are domestic dictatorships rather than contrasting Athenian laws. You trace your fingertip against the chalky circle, and dry dust lifts, tickling your nostrils. It's a reminder that revolution often begins with the humblest tools, a piece of slate, stick of chalk. A question. Freire invites a seamstress to write the word costura. She hesitates, then loops the letters with trembling confidence. He flips the circle diagram and inscribes lever in bold strokes, free. A ripple of understanding courses through the room, dissolving fear like morning mist under the sun. You feel a hush descend, tempered only by the distant cackle of a radio broadcasting pro-government propaganda. That broadcast is a mainstream fact during his exile. Freire's notebooks were smuggled out via clandestine radio theaters in Chile, where actors performed codified scripts so literacy lessons could air as popular soap operas. Yet historians still debate whether those broadcasts reached more rural listeners or mostly urban intellectuals tuning in with shortwave sets. Between sessions, you sip water laced with guava pulp, its sweetness a sharp counterpoint to the regime's austerity. Freire tosses you a knowing glance as he invites students into pairs. They recite Calandra-response questions. What is justice? Justice is sharing land. What is oppression? Oppression is silence. 3 light jokes bubble free. One at picturing these recitations as a reality TV talent show. Another at Freire, awarding literary gold stars like a kindergarten teacher gone revolutionary. And a third at imaging a modern app-free regrams, sending push notifications. Time to question your day. Swipe up to liberate. As the heat peaks, Freer leans against the blackboard's corner and folds his arms. You catch the metallic gleam of surveillance cameras hidden in the rafters. One of many factoids from 1964 when the military regime instituted classroom monitoring to squash subversion. Freer knows his methods are watched. That risk charges him with adrenaline. He murmurs about the peasant code. Literacy lessons must be codified in terms of daily life markets, rivers, family. It's an approach that later shaped critical pedagogy worldwide. Yet a fringe claim insists he composed secret lesson plans on banana leaves, dissolving them in water to avoid document seizures. Historians still argue whether these organic lesson plans ever truly existed, or if they're romantic embellishments nodding to Freer's commitment to the marginalized. You glance at the students, their hands calloused from tilapia, nets, and manioc harvests, now gingerly handling quills. A seamstress tightens her Saratern skirt and giggles triumphantly as she spells Ejikako freehand. The classroom thumps with quiet triumph, like the low hum of Berlin's clandestine presses. Or the silent groan of a prison gate swung open for a single inmate. You lean forward, feeling the chalk dust and sweat mingle on your palms, an alchemy of oppression transformed into collective knowledge. A sudden gust rattles the windows, an unseasonal squall triggered by a tropical front. Freer steps to the door and peeks out, wariness sharpening his gaze. You sense the tension of an impending raid. Soldiers operating under Institutional Act No. 1 have been known to burst in and haul teachers away. 3 muted laughs slip through. One picturing Freer picking chalk shards from his hair as police whisk him off. Another at imagining students hiding quills in sugarcane bundles. And a third at the thought of guerrilla fighters swapping literacy codes under banana trees. But the soldiers pass by. Freer exhales and turns back to the blackboard, offering a final exercise. Write your own name, then next to it, write your dream for society. The room falls silent again, punctuated only by the scratch of pumpkins being carved into letters. You watch as each name emerges: Maria, Igualdade, Joe, Tara, Anna, Labordade. Each word lands soft as a feather against the oppressive air, yet carries the weight of cannon fire. You lean against the classroom wall, reflecting on earlier journeys. Socrates' vanishing bath routine, Boethius's hidden dormouse, Bruno's cosmic smoke, Spinoza's exiled tortoise, rumor, Voltaire's insect wing pamphlets, Rousseau's shepherd disguise, Kant's hedgehog catalogue, Hegel's monkey essays, Marx's canary spy legend, Nietzsche's taxidermied cheetah, Beauvoir's canary-coated feminism, Foucault's restroom recorders, and Gramsci's bread ink disguises. Freer's banned pedagogy fits right into this tapestry of subversion through the quotidian. Before you leave, Freer hands you a torn fragment of the lesson written in chalk on a scrap of cardboard. Reading. The world precedes reading the word. It's a mainstream adage from his Pedagogy of the Oppressed that will reverberate through educational circles globally. Yet some insist it was originally longer. Reading the world precedes reading the word, and the world writes back. Scholars still argue whether that full phrase was edited for brevity or lost in translation. You tuck the cardboard into your satchel alongside Gramsci's letter, the brittle surface crackling like a promised dot outside. The sun dips behind a grove of coconut palms, painting the sky in molten orange. Cicadas drum in the heat, their song. A lullaby for restless minds. Freer waves goodbye, chalk dust trailing from his fingers like confetti after a silent revolution. You step into the dusk, exhilarated and unsettled, carrying the echo of his lesson in your bones. Tomorrow, you'll slip into a Bogota lecture hall to witness Foucault's students debate censors all over again, But for now, you drift home under a canopy of stars, each one twinkling with forbidden ideas. You slip from Freer's chalk-dusted classroom into the glow of your smartphone's lock screen. The faint perfume of warm plastic mingling with the electric hum of data center fans humming somewhere deep underground. Your thumb hovers over a news app, scrolling past headlines that sound like echoing edicts. Account suspended. Content removed. Platform violation. You probably won't survive this. A single ill-judged hashtag can land you in a digital gulag, where your posts vanish into algorithmic oblivion. The neon icons of your social feed blaze like tiny torches in an endless night. It's promising connection while breathing down your neck with unseen rules. You tap open a thread by a well-known activist, but a red banner blocks the view. This content is unavailable in your region. The air around you tastes faintly of overheated circuits, and you feel the weight of thousands of unseen moderators, both human and ice-sifting, through every word you write. It's a mainstream fact that by 2022, more than 70 governments worldwide employed internet shutdowns or throttle measures to silence protests, cutting off entire cities from the digital agora where voices unite. Yet fringe rumor insists that some takedowns are orchestrated not by states, but by corporate bots playing ghostly vigilantes. Flagging terms like revolution or solidarity on a whim, scholars still argue whether these algorithmic bans simply replicate state censorship or represent a new form of private power that outlives any single regime. You swipe up to discover a guide on circumventing geo-blocks installing free VPNs that taste like burnt toast on your palate. Networks that route you through servers in handwritten digital diaries posted on clandestine blogs. A joke crosses your mind. You picture the VPN as a mischievous hamster spinning a tiny wheel in a basement server room, routing your data around border blocks. You grin, recalling Socrates drinking hemlock in a dank Athenian cell. Now, the hemlock is the toxic code that twists your messages into silence. 3 light laughs burst from you, one at imagining Bruno's pyre replaced by a corporate firewall spewing error code instead of smoke. Another picturing Spinoza excommunicated by a terms of service violation, and a third at conjuring Nietzsche's disdain when his tweet chain is broken by Twitter's new character, Limitash Bermensch truncated. As you dig deeper, the screen floods with protest images flagged for hate speech, despite their peaceful intent. Beneath each blacked-out thumbnail, instructions invite you to file an appeal. A bureaucratic labyrinth that rivals the Inquisition's slow wheels. You feel a familiar frustration, like waiting for Kant's unpublished addendum to slip past censors pacing the digital corridors for a loophole. You start drafting an appeal, peppering it with civil jargon and emoji diplomacy. The irony is not lost. You're negotiating with a faceless algorithm, pleading for your own words to be restored. This echo chamber feels narrower than Hegel's lecture hall, yet its impact can echo across continents as silently as Gramsci's prison notebooks circulating from cell to cell. You switch platforms, logging into an open-source social network, queuing posts in chronological clarity. Nodes of servers ring with the chatter of peer-to-peer code, maps of interactions drawn in glowing lines. A fringe detail floats by. Conspiracy buffs swear that major tech companies seeded these Mastodon servers with proprietary backdoors, harvesting metadata like breadcrumbs, leading back to your doorstep. Historians still argue whether early digital dissidents, cypherpunks of the 1990s or grassroots bloggers of the Arab Spring first harnessed peer-to-peer platforms to evade censorship. You lean in, inhaling the cool draft from your laptop vents, and feel the click-click of keys as urgent as any clandestine typewriter in Voltaire's Parisian press. Momentarily, you glimpse a mirror in your screen's reflection, your eyes illuminated by lines of code and comment threads. You realize your digital self is a new kind of frontier where words can be blunted by moderation rules, where images disintegrate under takedown notices, and where your avatar can be banished with a single swipe. But you also sense glimpses of resistance. Open source browsers patched to bypass state firewalls. Blockchain-based microblogs afloat on decentralized rails. Anonymous art sites where activists trace their stories in digital murals. You laugh softly at the vision of a cheeky AI bot wearing sunglasses and smirking as it screens out propaganda. A self-proclaimed digital Robin Hood who whacks the ban hammer only when tweets are truly malicious. 3 playful jokes flicker, picturing modern-day philosophers live streaming from underground server farms bedeviled by overheating fans. Imagining Marx's manifesto reissued as an NFT drop on Ethereum. And conjuring a YouTube short of Beauvoir snapping back at mansplainers with pixelated sass. These images lighten the hum around you, reminding you that humor can thread through even the tightest bands. You scroll further, landing on a story of a Chinese netizen imprisoned for posting an AI-generated poem. Fireflies of Freedom on a coded microblog. The piece syncs with Foucault's notion that power produces knowledge, each line of the poem shaped by the very platforms that censored it. You taste salt on your lips, an echo of the Atlantic breeze in recyphalizing that digital and physical oppressions intertwine. Yet, just as Freer taught peasants to read their world, today's digital dissidents learn to read code as a path to liberation. You lean back, fingers still poised over your device, feeling the gentle warmth of protest brewing behind your screen. You've navigated the labyrinth of algorithmic bans, flicked aside takedown notices, and traced the digital echoes of those who defied state and corporate censors before. Now, in this neon-lit moment, you carry the wisdom of every banned philosopher: Socrates, Poison Goblet, Boethius's Consolations, Bruno's Pyre, Spinoza's Lenses, Voltaire's Presses, Rousseau's Exiles, Kant's Manuscripts, Hegel's Chalk, Marx's Pamphlets, Nietzsche's Cheetah, Beauvoir's Feminist Cafes, Foucault's Lecture Halls, Gramsci's Cells. Freer's classrooms each stride a step toward words that refuse to disappear. You pocket your phone as the battery indicator dims in ancient twilight compared to centuries of forbidden ideas. Outside, the hum of the city pulses like a distant drum. Streetlights flickering across rain-slick sidewalks. You step into the dusk of a world where code is the new scroll, and your voice echoes through fiber optic cables to lands beyond your reach. The digital agora beckons, expansive, risk-laden, and alive with possibility. Now, in this hushed moment, the soft pulse of your breath matches the gentle exhale of centuries. As peace settles around you like the warmest, most welcoming blanket, memories of Socrates' Final.com sip drift softly through your mind, followed by Boethius's consoling dialogue under low candlelight, Bruno's blaze of unforgettable defiance, and Spinoza's crystalline clarity that saw God and nature as one. Then, one by one, Voltaire's sharp pamphlets, Rousseau's clandestines, Kant's carefully polished drafts, and Hegel's silent chalk dust join the chorus of voices that refuse to be silenced. You feel a serene satisfaction as the tension of forbidden words dissolves, leaving only curiosity's soft glow. The echoes of Marx's underground manifestos, Nietzsche's Alpine provocations, Baptista, Beauvoir's smoky cafe debates, Foucault's probing lecture halls, Gramsci's hidden prison notebooks, and Freer's lively chalk spirals cocoon you in reflective quiet. Each idea you have touched tonight rests gently in your consciousness like an ember that warms without scorching, promising to kindle hope rather than ignite conflict. Allow your thoughts to drift on this ocean of contemplation, knowing that the barriers of cell bars, royal decrees, and modern algorithms cannot contain the human impulse to seek, question, and imagine. The night around you breathes an endless lullaby, whispering that every spark of dissent you have witnessed will seed new courage when challenges return. Feel your eyelids grow heavier as the final embers of each story fade into an amber glow, holding space for tomorrow's bright possibilities without burning you out. When you surrender to rest, trust that this quiet reflection is itself a revolutionary act carried forward in dreams where ideas run free. Let go of the heaviness of resistance and bask in this gentle hush where every thought has room to breathe. Rest well, dear listener, until morning's question arises. End of script. Sweet dreams.